The wind that scoured the capital city of Lycaonia didn't just carry the bite of oncoming winter, it carried the scent of despair. It whispered through the marble columns of the Alpha King's citadel, a mournful counterpoint to the stifling silence within the royal chambers. In the heart of that opulent, cold fortress, the most powerful wolf in 7 territories stood broken. King Kieran, a mountain of battle-hardened muscle and fearsome reputation, whose very name made rival packs tremble, cradled a bundle of cream-colored fleece as if it were made of spun glass and frost. His knuckles were white, his jaw a granite cliff, but his ice-blue eyes, usually sharp enough to flay a man's soul bare, were red-rimmed pools of raw, unadulterated terror. Inside the fleece, barely the size of his forearm, was his daughter, his pup, Lyra. She was 5 weeks old, and she was dying. A low, continuous growl vibrated in Kieran's chest, a sound of such profound helplessness it unnerved the 4 elite guards stationed at the chamber doors. They shifted on their feet, eyes averted from their sovereign's anguish. On a low table nearby sat a crystal goblet filled with the finest goat's milk, warmed and sweetened with honey. A dribble of it was on the pup's chin, a testament to another failed attempt. Lyra wouldn't take it. She hadn't taken the cow's milk, the specialized formula brought from the human cities, or the milk from a dozen carefully selected she-wolves from the royal pack. She was fadding, her tiny body rejecting sustenance, her weak cries growing fainter each day since her mother, Queen Selene, had been ripped from them in a bloody, treacherous ambush a fortnight prior. The royal physician, an old wolf with a kind face etched with new lines of worry, bowed his head. "My king, her wolf is calling for what it knows. It is not just milk she needs. It is the comfort, the scent, the living essence of a mother. She grieves. Her soul is retreating." Kieran's head snapped up, the alpha power in the room surging, making the flames in the hearth gutter. "Then find what she needs." His voice was a thunderclap, stripped of all regality, pure paternal desperation. "Turn the world upside down. I don't care if you have to summon a spirit from the netherworld. Find something that will keep her heart beating." It was his beater, Gareth, a steady and pragmatic shadow who spoke carefully. "Sire, we have exhausted the nobility. Perhaps we look beyond. The city is full of nursing mothers. Human or wolf, it matters not. The pup needs sustenance. We issue a decree." A decree, it was an admission of defeat, a broadcasting of the royal vulnerability to every ear in the kingdom. But Kieran looked at Lyra's face, her features so like Selene's, her chest rising and falling with terrifying fragility. He would burn his own kingdom to the ground if it gave her one more breath. "Do it," he rasped. "Every mother within the city walls, bring them now." The decree from the citadel tore through the Ashen district, Lycaonia's poorest quarter, like a winter gale. It promised a king's ransom in gold, enough to buy a lifetime of warmth, food, and safety to any nursing mother who could succeed where the finest in the land had failed. It was a siren call to the desperate, and the narrow, muddy streets soon teemed with women, their faces etched with hope and fear, shepherded by stone-faced royal guards. Among them was Ilara. She moved like a ghost through the bustling crowd, her worn grey cloak pulled tightly around her and the small, sleeping form cradled against her chest. Her own son, Finn, just 3 months old, slept peacefully, unaware of the royal drama. Ilara's heart was a drum against her ribs. The gold was a fantasy, a chance to escape the damp, one-room hovel, to afford medicine when the chills came, to never have to choose between a loaf of bread and a pat of butter again. But it was more than the gold. The whisper had traveled on the decree itself. The Alpha King's pup is failing. The Alpha King is broken. She remembered King Kieran, not the king, but the warrior. She'd seen him once, years ago, from a great distance, leading his warriors in the victory parade after the Northern War. He'd been a figure of terrifying, majestic power. The idea of that same man brought to his knees by a tiny, starving pup, it stirred something deep within her, a maternal ache that transcended fear. The line into the citadel's lower hall was long and slow. Ilara watched as women, human and wolf-kind alike, were led into a side chamber and emerged moments later, faces fallen, shaking their heads. "The pup," they muttered, "so small, so listless. She won't latch, she just turns away." When it was Ilara's turn, a stern-faced she-wolf guard gestured her in. The room was warm, dominated by a large chair where a formidable-looking matron sat, the head nurse. Name, the matron barked. Ilara. Species. Human, the word felt small in the grand stone room. The matron's eyes flickered with dismissive disappointment. Wolf-kind pups often thrived better with wolf-kind milk, everyone knew. A quick, impersonal examination followed. Healthy enough, the matron grunted. The pup is in the adjacent solar. You will be given a clean cloth and a bowl of royal milk. You will express your milk into the bowl. If the pup takes it from the bowl, you will then be allowed to attempt to nurse her directly. Understood. Ilara nodded, her throat too dry for words. This was it, not even a chance to hold the child first. She was to be a dairy maid, a mechanical solution. The spark of hope inside her dimmed. She was led into a small, sunlit room, and there, in a bassinet of dark, polished wood, lay the royal pup. Ilara's breath caught. Lyra was even tinier than she'd imagined, a pale, beautiful thing with a dusting of silver-grey hair like morning frost. But her skin was translucent, a faint blue hue around her closed eyes. She wasn't crying. She was too weak for that. She simply existed, each breath a shuddering, shallow event. A maid placed a pristine silver bowl and cloth on a stand beside the bassinet. The guard stood by the door, a silent sentinel. The procedure was cold, clinical. With trembling fingers, Ilara adjusted Finn in his sling, his warm weight a comfort against her panic. She turned her back to the guard, a feeble attempt at privacy, and began the awkward, unromantic task. Her milk, when it came, was warm and rich. She filled the bowl perhaps a third of the way, her face burning with a humiliation that felt acute in this sterile space. The maid stepped forward, dipped a tiny golden spoon into Ilara's milk, and brought it to Lyra's lips. The pup's head turned away, a feeble, stubborn rejection. The maid tried again and again. Each failure was a nail in Ilara's coffin of hope. She could see the guard readying to usher her out. This was it. Back to the mud, back to the cold. And then Finn, disturbed by her movements, let out a soft, sleepy whimper. Lyra's head, with a sudden, surprising jerk, turned toward the sound. Ilara's heart stopped. Without thinking, driven by an instinct older than kingdoms, she spoke. Her voice was soft, a gentle hum she used only for her son. "Shhh, little one, it's all right, just a little friend." She didn't ask permission, she moved. In one fluid motion, she stepped to the bassinet, reached in, and gathered the tiny pup into her arms, cradling her next to Finn. The guard surged forward, a growl starting in his throat, but froze as Ilara settled into a chair by the window. She ignored them all. The world narrowed to the two infants in her arms. She could feel Lyra's frightening lightness, the bird-like flutter of her heart. She caught the scent of the pup, lavender and milk, and something fading, like a distant star. "Oh, you sweet, lonely thing," Ilara murmured, the words pouring from her, a lullaby of pure empathy. "You're so lost, aren't you?" Holding Lyra in the crook of one arm, she loosened her simple tunic. She didn't reach for the silver bowl. She guided the pup's head, offering her what she had offered Finn 1,000 times, not just food, but comfort, sanctuary. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Lyra's nose twitched. Then it twitched again, sniffing not at the offered nourishment, but at the skin of Ilara's chest, at the scent of her, of another baby, of life that was not tinged with grief and desperation. And then, with a tiny, desperate sound, Lyra latched on. It wasn't a graceful, strong suckle. It was weak, tentative, but it was there, a pull, a swallow. A stunned silence descended upon the room. The maid's hand flew to her mouth. The guard's eyes went wide. Ilara felt the pull, felt the tiny, rhythmic tug, and a wave of fierce, protective joy slammed into her so hard her vision blurred. She bent her head, her cheek resting against Lyra's silvery hair, and began to sing, a low, wordless melody from her own childhood. She didn't see the door to the inner chamber swing open. She didn't see the colossal shadow that filled the doorway. But she felt it, a pressure in the air, a primal, electric awareness that made the hair on her arms stand on end. The guard and maid dropped into immediate, deep bows, faces pressed to the floor. Ilara looked up. King Kiran stood there, frozen on the threshold. He had clearly come running, his royal tunic askew, his hair disheveled. All the terrifying alpha power was still wrapped around him like a storm cloud, but at its center was a man utterly transfixed. His gaze was locked on the scene before him, the ragged human woman in her worn cloak, holding his daughter to her breast, his pup nursing with a weak but steady rhythm she had not possessed in days. The growl that had been in his chest was gone. The red-rimmed eyes were now wide, unblinking. He took one step into the room, then another, as if drawn by an invisible cord. He moved with the careful, predatory silence of his wolf, but there was no threat in it, only a desperate, hungry awe. He sank to his knees before her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. So close she could see the storm of emotions in their blue depths, shock, hope, a dawning, staggering gratitude that threatened to undo him. For a long moment, the only sounds were Ilara's soft singing and the faint, precious sound of his daughter swallowing. When he finally spoke, Alpha King Kieran's voice was not a command, not a roar. It was a shattered whisper, rough with emotion, laced with a plea more powerful than any decree. Don't stop. The silence in the sunlit solar was a living thing, thick and pulsating with the impossible reality of what was happening. Ilara's song died in her throat, but the low hum of it seemed to linger in the air between her and the kneeling king. His proximity was overwhelming. He was not just a man. He was a force of nature condensed into human form, smelling of pine, cold stone, and a deep, wild power that made the base of her spine tingle. Yet on his knees, he looked younger, almost shattered, his immense authority subsumed by a more primal need. Lyra suckled, the weak pulls growing slightly stronger, as if the very act was drawing vitality back into her tiny body. Finn, snug in his sling against Ilara's other side, slept on, a peaceful counterweight to the seismic shift occurring around him. Kieran did not move, he barely seemed to breathe. His entire world had narrowed to the sight of his daughter's cheek, now faintly flushed with the effort of feeding, pressed against the pale, soft skin of a stranger, a human stranger. The guards and maid remained prostrate, not daring to look up. It was Ilara who broke the spell, her voice a fragile thread in the heavy quiet. She's eating, Your Majesty." The title felt absurd on her lips in this intimate, raw moment. He flinched as if struck, his ice-blue eyes finally lifting from Lyra to meet Ilara. In them, she saw a maelstrom, gratitude so profound it bordered on pain, a dawning, frantic hope, and beneath it all, the sharp, calculating instinct of an alpha assessing a new, vital resource. "What is your name?" His voice was still that rough whisper, but it carried an edge of command now, the king reasserting himself through the father. "Ilara." Ilara, he tested the word as if its syllables held magic. How? It was a simple, loaded question. How had she done what dozens of others could not? How had she bypassed the royal protocols, the spoons and bowls, and gone straight to the heart of the matter? She glanced down at the two infants in her arms, her own courage bolstered by their innocent needs. "She wasn't hungry for milk alone, sire. She was lonely. She could smell my son, she could smell life that wasn't afraid for her. She just needed to be held like a baby, not a royal heir." Kieran's gaze flicked to Finn, taking in the healthy, plump cheeks visible in the sling, then back to Ilara's face. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of her own struggles, the careful mend in the shoulder of her cloak, the quiet dignity that poverty had not been able to erode. This was not a courtier, this was a survivor. Lyra finished, her mouth going slack in sudden, milky sleep, a deep, contented sleep she had not known in weeks. A soft sigh escaped her, a sound so blissful it made Kieran's breath hitch. Carefully, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his battle-scarred hands, he reached out. His finger, which could snap a man's neck, traced the curve of his daughter's cheek, coming perilously close to where Ilara's skin met the pup's. The contact sent a jolt through them both. For Ilara, it was the shocking heat and power contained in that simple touch. For Kieran, it was the profound, humbling warmth of his daughter, finally sated. He withdrew his hand as if burned, standing up in a swift, fluid motion that made Ilara shrink back instinctively. The alpha was back in full force, his emotions sealed behind a mask of regal intensity. "She sleeps," he stated, his voice now firm, filling the room. you will stay. It was not a request, it was a decree of a different kind. The gold, Ilara began, her practical mind grasping for the promised security. Will be yours, tenfold, Kieran interrupted, his eyes boring into hers. But the gold is for the success. Your continued presence is not a transaction for payment. It is a royal command. You will reside in the citadel. You will nurse Lyra. You will see to her needs as you see to your own son. Panic, sharp and cold, lanced through Ilara's momentary relief. Live here, in this gilded cage of power and intrigue, she was a woman of the Ashen district who bartered for yarn and mended her own shoes. The citadel was a world of whispers, politics, and dangerous eyes. Your Majesty, my home, my life is in the city. I cannot just. Your life, Kieran said, taking a step closer, his shadow enveloping her, is now here. Your pup is strong, healthy. He nodded at Finn. Lyra needs that strength. She needs his presence as much as your milk. You will have chambers, servants, anything you require, but you will not leave. The finality in his tone brooked no argument. The guard by the door finally rose, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, a silent reinforcement of the king's will. Ilara looked from the hard-faced guard to the implacable king, then down at the two sleeping infants, her own flesh and blood, and the precious, fragile pup who had, in a few minutes, become inexplicably entwined with her heart. To refuse was impossible. It wasn't just the threat, it was the sight of Lyra's peaceful face. She had touched death's doorstep and pulled this child back. Could she abandon her now? And my son, she asked, her voice tight, he will be safe, he will want for nothing. A flicker of something, perhaps understanding, passed through Kieran's eyes. He will be under the protection of the crown. He will have everything Lyra has. You have my word. The word of an alpha king. It was said to be unbreakable, more binding than any written law. Ilara felt the walls of her old life crumbling. She nodded, a short, stiff movement. Then I will stay. The transition was a whirlwind of disorienting luxury and silent scrutiny. Ilara and Finn were installed not in the servants' quarters, nor the guest suites, but in a spacious, airy chamber within the royal family's private wing. It was connected by a beautifully carved door to the royal nursery, which had been cold and unused since Seleni's death. Now it was aired out, filled with warmth from a huge fireplace, and held two bassinets, one ornate and ancient, one new and simple, side by side. The royal staff, from the stern head housekeeper to the youngest nursery maid, were study in masked curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. She was a human, a commoner, yet she walked the hallowed halls with the Alpha King's pup regularly in her arms, and her own child was treated with a care that bordered on the reverential. Whispers followed her like ghosts. He's bewitched the king, mark my words, she heard a maid hiss around a corner. A human wet nurse in the royal wing, it's an abomination against tradition, grumbled an older wolf-kind guard. But others, especially those who had seen Lyra's decline, looked at her with awe. She's a blessing from the moon goddess, a young cook's helper whispered, leaving an extra honey cake for Ilara on her tray. Kieran was a constant, unsettling presence. He did not visit on a schedule. He would simply appear, a silent spectre in the doorway of the nursery, often late at night when the citadel slept. He would watch as Ilara nursed Lyra, or sang to both Barbies, or gently rocked them to sleep. He asked no questions, offered no conversation. He just observed. His gaze was heavy, intense, studying her every interaction with his daughter, as if deciphering a complex battle strategy. One such night, a week into her new life, he spoke. Lyra had just finished feeding and was burrowed contentedly against Ilara's shoulder, while Finn dozed in his crib. She recognizes your scent, Kieran said, his voice low in the firelit quiet. Before you enter the room, her crying lessens. She knows your step. Ilara, gently patting Lyra's back, met his eyes across the room. She knows safety, sire. It's a simple thing. Nothing is simple here, he countered, taking a step inside. He was closer than he had been since that first day. You treat her as you treat your own. You do not tremble when you hold her. You do not see a future queen. You see a baby. Because that is what she is, Ilara said, a hint of defiance coloring her tone. Under the titles and the fleece blankets, She is just a baby who needs her mother. The word mother hung in the air, charged and dangerous. Kieran's jaw tightened, a shadow of grief passing over his face. Her mother is gone. I know, Ilara said softly, her own heart aching for the queen she'd never known, for the pup in her arms, for the grieving man before her. But she is not gone from Lyra's blood or her spirit. I am just a placeholder for the comfort she cannot give. Kieran stared at her for a long moment, as if seeing her truly for the first time, not as a tool, not as a commoner, but as a woman of profound and instinctive understanding. The raw, vulnerable father resurfaced briefly. Do not speak of yourself as a placeholder, he murmured, the command gone from his voice. You are the reason her heart still beats. He turned and left as silently as he had come, leaving Ilara more unsettled than before. His words were a compliment, but they felt like a chain, forging her role in stone. The next day, the chain tightened. Beta Gareth found her in a small, sunny sitting room attached to her chambers, where she was trying to mend one of Finn's tiny shirts with unfamiliar, silken thread. Mistress Ilara, he said with a polite but distant nod, the king has instructed that you be included in the royal household's daily rhythms. You will take your meals in the family dining hall when the king is in residence. You will also have a guard detail assigned to you and the children at all times, for their protection, of course. And to make sure I don't run away, Ilara thought bitterly. The gilded cage now had visible bars. The first meal in the vast, echoing dining hall was an ordeal, seated not with the servants, but at the far end of the immense table from Kieran, who was surrounded by his generals and advisers. She felt every aristocratic eye upon her. The stares were icy, laced with suspicion and disdain. She ate little, focusing on keeping her hands from shaking. As the meal ended, a tall, elegant she-wolf with hair the color of wheat and eyes like chips of amber approached her. Lady Isolde, a cousin of the late queen and a prominent figure in the court. Her smile was as sharp as a dagger. So you are the little human savior, Isolde purred, her gaze sweeping over Ilara's simple, borrowed dress. How quaint. Tell me, do you find our ways very different from the filth of the Ashen district? The insult was deliberate, a testing of her place. Before Ilara could formulate a response, a voice cut through the hall, cold and absolute. Lady Isolde. King Kieran had risen. The conversations around him died instantly. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried like a glacier carving. Ilara is under my protection. She is the life-giver to my heir. You will address her with the respect that position demands, or you will find your place in this court diminished. A stunned silence fell. Isolde's perfect face went pale, then flushed with humiliation. She bowed her head stiffly and retreated without another word. Kieran's eyes found Ilara from across the room. There was no warmth in them, only a clear, uncompromising message: you are mine to protect, and mine to control. That night, as a winter storm lashed the citadel towers, Lyra woke with a fretful cry. Ilara, already awake and nursing Finn, went to her immediately. She gathered the pup, settling into a chair by the nursery fire with both infants. Soon, they were both fed and asleep, a tangle of limbs and soft breaths on her lap. Kieran found her there again. This time, he didn't just stand in the doorway. He walked in and stood before the fire, looking down at the three of them, the human woman and the two pups, one silver, one dark, bound together in sleep. The court will not accept you, he said quietly, his words almost lost in the crackle of the flames. They will see you as a threat, an opportunist, or a stain on tradition. Ilara looked up, weary but unwavering. I am not here for the court, your majesty, I am here for her. He nodded slowly, as if this was the answer he both expected and feared. Then you must understand, he said, his gaze finally leaving the children to pierce her own. To protect her, you must become untouchable, not just a wet nurse, not just a servant. You must become something they cannot challenge. A cold dread trickled down Ilara's spine. What does that mean? Kieran's eyes were like frozen lakes, reflecting the firelight but giving no warmth. It means the role you play must evolve. The world saw a desperate king seeking a nurse. They must now see something else, something that justifies your presence in my inner sanctum. your influence over my heir." He paused, letting the storm howl outside fill the space between his words. "You saved her life, Ilara, in the eyes of this pack that has created a bond, a debt. We will formalize it." "Formalize how?" she whispered, holding the sleeping children tighter. "Tomorrow," King Kieran said, his voice returning to that tone of irrevocable decree, "before the assembled court, you will be officially recognized, not as a servant, but as the royal foster mother to the crown princess. You will take a vow of allegiance, not just to the crown, but to her, and in return, the crown will vow its eternal protection over you and your bloodline." Ilara's breath caught, a royal foster mother. It was an ancient, almost mythical title rarely used. It would place her in a nebulous, powerful space, neither royalty nor commoner, but a cherished, protected part of the royal fabric. It would shield her with ceremony and law, but it would also bind her irrevocably. There would be no returning to the Ashen district, no simple life. She would be Lyra's mother in the eyes of the pack forever. She looked at Lyra's peaceful face, at Finn nestled beside her. She thought of Isolde's sneer, the whispers in the halls, the terrifying, possessive protection in the Alpha King's eyes. She had walked into the citadel for a bag of gold. She had stepped into a labyrinth of power, grief, and a desperate love that was reshaping her destiny. The bargain was no longer about milk. It was about her soul, her future, and the two pups who now held her heart captive. In the dancing firelight, under the weight of the king's expectant gaze, Ilara, mother of the Ashen district, made her choice. "What," she asked, her voice steady now, "must I do?" The night after Kieran's pronouncement was the longest of Ilara's life. Sleep was a phantom, chased away by the echoing words royal foster mother and the image of standing before the entire court. The fire in the nursery had dwindled to embers, but the two pups, Lyra and Finn, slept on in a tangle of innocence on her lap, oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath their fragile world. Just before dawn, a discreet knock heralded the arrival of two women she had not met before. They were not the stiff-necked maids of the royal household. One was older, with kind, shrewd eyes and hands that looked capable of both delivering a baby and wielding a herblore poultice. She introduced herself as Maud, the royal midwife and healer. The other, younger and with a warrior's lean build and a calm demeanor, was Tessa, a she-wolf guard of the elite Luna's shield, the personal guard of the queen. "The king sent us," Maud said, her voice a soft rasp as she set down a basket of pungent herbs and soft cloths, "for the ceremony tonight." "Ceremony?" Ilara's voice was hoarse. She had imagined a grim announcement in the throne room, not a ceremony. Tessa gave a small, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her watchful eyes. "The recognition of the foster mother is an ancient rite, Mistress Ilara. It's not been performed in over a century, but it has protocols. It is a sacred bond, recognized by the moon goddess. It requires preparation." The preparation was a bewildering blend of the mundane and the deeply mystical. Maud examined both infants with a clinical yet gentle touch, pronouncing them healthy. Though she clucked her tongue at Lyra's lingering fragility. "You've done a miracle, girl," she muttered to Ilara, "but the roots are still shallow. The ceremony will help." Then came the bathing, not a simple wash, but a ritual cleansing. Ilara was led to a small, steamy chamber where water infused with silverleaf and moon-blessed salt awaited. Maud instructed her to submerge, to wash away the dust of the old life. As Ilara sank into the hot, fragrant water, she felt a surreal detachment. Was she washing away the grime of the Ashen district or the last vestiges of her own autonomy? Tessa remained present, a silent guardian, her hand resting on the pommel of her short sword. It was protection, Ilara knew, but also surveillance. She was a state asset now, being polished for display. After the bath, she was anointed with oils that smelled of cedar and night-blooming jasmine, sense of strength and nurturing. Her hair, usually tied in a simple braid, was brushed out until it fell in a dark, glossy curtain down her back. They did not give her a court gown. Instead, Maud produced a garment from a carved wooden chest. It was a robe of soft, undyed linen, simply cut, belted with a plain cord. It was the traditional dress of a pack matron, a garment of service and nurture, devoid of rank or ornament. "This is what you wear," Maud said, helping her into it. "You come before the pack not as a claimant to glory, but as a vessel of life. It is honest. It will silence some of the vipers, maybe. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in the citadel tightened like a drawn bowstring. Ilara could feel it even in her isolated chambers, the increased tempo of footsteps in the halls, the low thrum of voices, the scent of tension seeping under the door. Beta Gareth arrived in the afternoon, his face an impassive mask. "The court is assembled," he stated. "The king awaits. You will be escorted by Tessa and myself. The infants will remain here with Maud and two of the Luna's shield. They are safe." The thought of leaving Finn and Lyra sent a bolt of panic through her. "I should nurse Lyra before." "The rite must be performed on an empty stomach for the foster mother," Gareth interrupted, not unkindly. "It is symbolic of your readiness to receive the new bond. Come." The walk through the citadel was a gauntlet. Courtiers lined the corridors, their finery a riot of color and wealth against the stark grey stone. Their eyes were weapons, curious, hostile, calculating, envious. Whispers slithered through the air like snakes. "Human in the matron's robe, the audacity. They say the pup would have died. What does the king truly see in her? She's plain as oat bread." "A political move, surely. He weakens the noble family's claims." Ilara kept her eyes fixed on Gareth's broad back, clutching the folds of her linen robe. Tessa walked a half-step behind her, a palpable protective presence. They passed through the grand hall, a cavernous space of banners and trophies of war, and into the heart of Lykania's power, the Alpha's sanctum. It was not a throne room in the traditional sense. It was a vast, circular chamber beneath a domed ceiling painted with constellations. The floor was inlaid with a massive mosaic of a great, silver wolf under a full moon. At the chamber's head, on a dais of black basalt, sat not a throne, but a massive, ancient chair carved from a single piece of oak, the Alpha's seat. And in it, dressed not in royal regalia, but in a simple black tunic and trousers, his crown a mere silver circlet on his brow, sat Kieran. He looked less like a king and more like a primal judge. His power filled the room, a silent, rolling pressure that made the hairs on Ilara's arms stand on end. The chamber was packed with the elite of the pack, nobles, generals, elders in ceremonial furs. Lady Isolde stood at the front, her beautiful face a perfect mask of cold neutrality. All eyes turned to Ilara as she entered. The silence was absolute, heavier than any noise. Gareth led her to the center of the mosaic, directly before the dais. She stood on the stone wolf's heart. Kieran rose. His movement was fluid, powerful. He descended the 2 steps of the dais until he stood on the same level as her, though still a few paces away. His ice-blue eyes held hers, and in that moment, the hundreds of spectators seemed to fade away. There was only him, the intensity of his gaze, and the terrifying significance of what was about to happen. "The pack gathers under the witness of the moon," Kieran's voice rang out, clear and resonant, echoing in the dome. "We come to honor a life given and a bond forged in necessity and grace." Ilara of the Ashen District stepped forward. She did, her legs feeling like water. "You have sustained the life of the royal heir, Lyra, daughter of Selene, when all others failed. You have shared the milk of your own body, the warmth of your own spirit, with the pup of your alpha. Do you come before this pack of your own free will to formalize this bond?" Every instinct screamed to say no, to flee back to anonymity. But she thought of Lyra's weak suckle, of Finn sleeping safely in a warm crib for the first time in his life. She thought of the promise of protection, not just for her, but for her son. "I do," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Then hear the weight of the vow," Kieran said. He moved closer, stopping an arm's length away. "The bond of royal foster mother is sacred and eternal. You vow to place the health, safety, and well-being of the royal heir above your own, from this day until your last. You vow to nurture her with a mother's love and a subject's loyalty. You vow to be her shelter and her guide, in light and in shadow. In return, the Alpha and the Pack vow to extend to you the protection of the crown. Your life and the life of your blood are bound to ours. Your enemies are our enemies. Your safety is our charge. Do you understand?" The scope of it was staggering. It was a total absorption into the royal machine. "I understand," Ilara whispered. "Then speak the vow." A elderly she-wolf, the pack historian, emerged from the crowd holding a worn, leather-bound book. She opened it and began to recite in an ancient, sing-song dialect. After each line, Ilara was to repeat it in the common tongue. By the silver light of the mother moon. By the silver light of the mother moon, Ilara echoed, her voice gaining strength. I bind my spirit to the royal blood. I bind my spirit to the royal blood. My heart shall beat for the heir's joy, my breath shall falter for her sorrow. My heart shall beat for the heir's joy, my breath shall falter for her sorrow. From this night, in the eyes of the pack, I am her mother in spirit and in sacred duty. A ripple went through the crowd. This was the core of it. Ilara took a deep breath, feeling the words etch themselves onto her soul. From this night, in the eyes of the pack, I am her mother in spirit and in sacred duty. The historian closed the book. Kieran took one final step forward. Now, he was so close she could see the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow, could feel the heat radiating from him. The vow is given, he intoned. Now the seal. From his belt he drew not a ceremonial dagger, but a simple, sharp thorn, a moon thorn from a plant that bloomed only under full moonlight. He took her left hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, electric. With a swift, precise motion, he pricked the pad of her ring finger. A single, perfect bead of crimson welled up. Then, to the audible shock of the assembly, he did the same to his own finger. Gasps echoed in the sanctum. The mingling of alpha blood with a commoner's, even symbolically, was unprecedented. Without breaking eye contact with her, Kieran pressed his bleeding finger to hers. Their blood mingled, a warm, intimate connection. As our blood joins in this moment, he said, his voice dropping for her ears more than the crowd's, so are our fates joined in the life of my daughter. Your protection is now written in my veins, Ilara. The pack bears witness. He raised their joined hands high. Behold, Ilara, royal foster mother to Crown Princess Lyra, under my protection and the pack's law, honor her as you honor the life she preserves. The command in his voice was absolute. After a stunned second, the crowd reacted. The warriors, led by Gareth, struck their fists over their hearts in a unison thump that shook the floor. The elders bowed their heads. The rest of the court followed suit in a wave of reluctant, murmured acknowledgement. Lady Isolde's bow was the slowest, her eyes blazing with a hatred she could no longer conceal. Kieran lowered their hands but did not immediately let go. His thumb brushed over her bleeding finger, a fleeting, strangely tender gesture. It is done, he murmured, his gaze searching hers for a reaction, fear, triumph, anything. But Ilara felt numb, hollowed out and filled with lead. She had just sworn her life away. She was now a permanent fixture in a glittering, dangerous world, bound by blood and vow to a grieving, unpredictable king and a fragile pup. The ceremony concluded with a formal summer feast. Ilara was placed at the high table, to the right of the Alpha's empty seat. Kieran did not stay for the feast. She picked at the extravagant food, feeling the stares like physical blows. A few brave souls, mostly older wolves who remembered the ancient ways, approached to offer terse congratulations. Most ignored her. She was returned to her chambers near midnight. Maud and Tessa were there, with both Barbies sleeping peacefully. The moment the door closed, the enormity of it all crashed down. Her legs buckled. She sank to the floor, the simple linen robe pooling around her, and began to shake. Tessa helped her up and into a chair. Maud pressed a cup of something warm and herbal into her hands. Drink, child, the shock is expected. What have I done? Ilara whispered, staring at the tiny, healing prick on her finger. You have secured your son's future, Tessa said bluntly, and you have given a dying pup a mother. The politics are poison, but the act is pure. Later, as Ilara lay in the unfamiliar, soft bed listening to the even breaths of her son and her foster daughter, the door to her chamber opened silently. She knew it was him before she saw his silhouette against the faint light from the nursery. Kieran stood at the foot of her bed, a shadow among shadows. You held yourself well, he said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. I had no choice, she replied, not bothering to hide her exhaustion and bitterness. He was silent for a long moment. "There is always a choice," he said finally. "You chose life for her, for your pup. That choice has consequences, both golden and grim." He paused. "Tomorrow the real work begins. The court has acknowledged you. Now you must live the part. You will begin lessons, pack history, etiquette, basic defense with Tessa. You will learn to be what Lyra needs you to be." He turned to leave, then stopped. "The vow was not just chains, Ilara," he said, his voice oddly strained. "It was also a shield, my shield. For what it is worth, thank you for wearing it." He was gone before she could respond. Ilara looked at the sleeping forms in the bassinets, side by side. She was no longer just a woman from the Ashen district. She was the royal foster mother, bound by a wolf's oath, living in the lion's den. The path ahead was shrouded in the mist of court intrigue and the king's unfathomable grief. But as she looked at Lyra's little chest rising and falling with strong, steady breaths, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. The vow was real. She was Lyra's mother now, in spirit and in sacred duty. And for that tiny, silver-furred pup, she would learn to navigate the shadows of the citadel, thorns and all. The morning after the recognition dawned not with the gentle grey light of the Ashen district, but with a sharp, formal knock that brooked no delay. Ilara's new reality began not with a soft adjustment, but with an immediate, rigorous immersion. Her first tutor was not a gentle scholar, but Tessa herself. The she-wolf guard stood in the center of the private sitting room, the plush carpets pushed back to reveal a section of smooth, polished stone floor. She held two practice daggers, their edges blunted, but their weight real. "Defense is not an option, Mistress Ilara," Tessa stated, her voice leaving no room for debate. "You are now a target, not just for political barbs, but potentially for steel. Those who oppose the king's decision or who see you as an obstacle to their own ambitions for the throne may seek to remove you. You must not be easy prey." Ilara, still aching with the emotional and physical exhaustion of the ceremony, stared at the proffered dagger. She had never held anything sharper than a kitchen knife. "I'm a mother, not a warrior." "You are the foster mother to the heir," Tessa corrected, her amber eyes hard. "That makes you a guardian of the royal line. A guardian must be able to guard. We start with the basics: stance, grip, and how to break a hold. You will not be winning any duels, but you may buy yourself the 3 seconds it takes for me or another shield to reach you." The lessons were grueling. Ilara's muscles, used to the endurance tasks of poverty, but not to precise, controlled violence, screamed in protest. Tessa was a relentless but fair instructor, correcting her posture, getting her through simple disarming maneuvers, teaching her to use her smaller size and perceived weakness to her advantage: a swift kick to the knee, a thumb driven into a nerve cluster. Between drills, while Ilara gasped for breath, Tessa would impart darker lessons. "Never accept food or drink from someone not vetted by Maud or myself. Be aware of blind spots in corridors. The scent of bitter almond is poison. Wolfsbane smells like rust and honey. Avoid it. Your greatest weapon is not this dagger," she said, tapping the practice blade. "It is your proximity to the king and the pup. Your scream, if it comes from the royal nursery, will bring the entire citadel down on the attacker's head. Do not be too proud to scream." It was a chilling education. The gilded cage now had unseen traps in its corners. Her second tutor arrived in the afternoon, Elder Theon, a wolf so old his fur was the color of ash and his back was perpetually stooped. He carried the scent of parchment and dust. His domain was not the body, but the past. "To navigate the present, you must understand the shadows the past casts," he wheezed, setting a heavy tome on the table between them. He opened it to an intricate family tree, the lines sprawling like roots. "This is the bloodline of the Lycanian throne. You must know it, not to memorize every name, but to understand the tensions." Bony finger traced a line. "Here is King Kieran, son of Alistair the Grim. Here is his late wife Selene, of the Silvermane line from the Eastern Marches, a powerful alliance that quelled a decade of border strife." The finger moved to a branching line. "Here is Lady Isolde. Her mother was a Silvermane as well, a cousin to Selene. Isolde was, many believed, a potential queen before Kieran's heart was captured by Selene. She has a claim, however tenuous, an ambition that burns like a cold fire." Ilara's stomach tightened as she looked at the chart. She was a mere notation nowhere on this vellum, yet her existence now disrupted its careful geometry. The foster mother right, Theon continued, turning brittle pages to an illuminated manuscript showing a similar ceremony from ages past, was last used when the great Alpha Fenrir's mate died in childbirth. A she-wolf from a lesser pack, but renowned for her healing knowledge, was brought to nurse the twin heirs. She saved them, was recognized, and her line was elevated to nobility. It caused resentment, wars of whispers, but it held. He peered at her over his spectacles. History does not repeat, but it rhymes, girl. You are the verse they did not wish to hear again. The lessons were a torrent of names, dates, treaties, and betrayals. Ilara's head swam with tales of usurpations, secret alliances, and legendary acts of loyalty. She began to see the courtiers not just as hostile faces, but as pieces on Theon's complex board. The generals who supported Kieran out of loyalty to his father, the merchants who backed Isolde for her favorable trade policies, the traditionalists who saw any human influence as a pollution of pure bloodlines. Her third and most subtle education came from Maud, and it happened in the quiet moments. As Ilara nursed Lyra, Maud would sit and talk of herbs and healing, but woven through were lessons on the Citadel's unseen pathways. The old drying room behind the kitchens has a loose grate, Maud mentioned casually while checking Finn's gums. Leads to a servant's stair that goes from the lower laundries to within a hall of the royal wing. Not many know it's there anymore. Another time, while applying a salve to Ilara's sore muscles, she murmured, "The guard change at the West Postern Gate is always 5 minutes late on nights of the full moon. The lieutenant there is fond of his ale." These were not just gossip. They were maps, escape routes, and vulnerabilities offered by a woman who had served the Citadel for 50 years and knew its every hidden pulse. Through it all, Kieran was a distant, yet omnipresent force. He did not participate in her lessons, but his influence shaped them. Tessa reported to him, Ilara was sure. The texts Theon brought were from the king's personal library, and often, at the end of the day, he would appear in the nursery doorway, a silent auditor of her progress. One evening, about a week into this brutal new curriculum, he found her not with the pups, but slumped over Elder Theon's latest tome, asleep on the parchment. The history of the War of the Howling Succession was a poor pillow. She awoke to the feeling of being watched. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a strange expression on his face, not anger, but something like pensive curiosity. "Elder Theon tells me you have a keen memory for lineages," Kieran said. "Tessa says you are clumsy but determined. Maud says your instincts with the pups are preternatural." Ilara sat up, wiping a trace of drool from the corner of her mouth, embarrassed. "I am trying, Your Majesty." "Why?" The question was blunt. "The vow is made. The gold is yours whether you excel at history or not. You could perform the bare minimum, nurse Lyra, keep your head down, and survive." She looked at him, this king who lived in a world of calculation and power plays. Could he truly not understand? "Because she deserves more than the bare minimum," Ilara said, her voice firming. "If I am to be her mother in the eyes of the pack, then I must be worthy of the title, not in their eyes but in hers. She will have questions one day. About her blood mother, about me, about this pack. I need to have answers. I need to understand the world I've brought her and my son into, so I can teach them to navigate it. Survival isn't enough. They need to thrive." Kieran was silent for a long moment. He pushed off the doorframe and walked to the window, looking out over the moonlit capital. "That is a sentiment worthy of a queen," he said quietly, almost to himself. The word hung between them, dangerous and electrifying. "I am no queen," Ilara said swiftly, the fear returning. "No," he agreed, turning back to her. His gaze was assessing, stripping away her weariness to see the steel she was forging within. "You are something else, something the court has no name for, that makes you more dangerous to them and more valuable to me." He approached the table, his eyes scanning the family tree she had been studying. His finger landed near Isolde's name. "You see the threat here." "Ambition cloaked in blood relation," Ilara said, repeating Theon's lesson. "Precisely. Tomorrow you will attend the open court with me." Ilara's blood ran cold. "Sire, I am not ready for that." "You will never feel ready," he stated. "But you must be seen. You must be seen with me. You must be seen holding Lyra in the seat of power, The rumors must be confronted, not hidden from. They whisper that you are a secret I keep in the shadows. We will bring you into the light, and they will have to blink against it. The next day, after a morning of frantic preparation, Maud helped her into a slightly more formal, but still simple grey dress, and Tessa drilled her once more on posture and where to look. Ilara found herself walking beside King Kieran through the grand hall. He carried Lyra, who was swaddled in a silver fleece, against his chest. Ilara carried Finn. The spectacle was meticulously orchestrated. The Alpha King and the foster mother, each bearing a child, a picture of a new, unorthodox royal unit. The open court was a session where any pack member could bring grievances or petitions. The hall was packed. The air grew stifling as they entered and took their places on the dais. Kieran sat in the Alpha's seat. He did not give Ilara a chair beside him. That would have been a step too far, but he gestured for her to stand at his right hand, just below the dais, in a space traditionally reserved for the beta or the reigning queen. Hundreds of eyes burned into her. She focused on Finn's weight, on the feel of his soft hair under her chin, and willed her knees not to buckle. The petitions began. A border dispute over hunting grounds, a complaint about trade tariffs. Through it all, Kieran was a model of focused authority, listening, questioning, issuing judgments. Lyra, perhaps soothed by the deep rumble of his voice, slept peacefully. Then a merchant stepped forward, a wealthy wolf with fine clothes and an ingratiating smile. He presented a case about the exclusivity of a fabric trade. His eyes kept flicking to Ilara with a calculating gleam. As he finished, Lady Isolde, who stood at the front of the noble assemblage, spoke without being acknowledged, her voice a silken dart. The concerns of the realm are so varied, my king. It must be a relief to have domestic comfort to return to. Her eyes swept over Ilara and the Barbies with dismissive pity, though one wonders at the wisdom of bringing such young, fragile things into the stirring air of the court. So many unfamiliar scents. It was a veiled threat, wrapped in false concern. A murmur ran through the crowd. Before Kieran could react, and Ilara saw the storm gather in his eyes, a deep, instinctual impulse rose within her. It was not the fear of the Ashen District woman, nor the studied response of a new student of courtly warfare. It was the raw, protective fury of a mother whose den had been threatened. She took one deliberate step forward, placing herself slightly more in the view of the assembly. She did not look at Isolde. She looked at the merchant who had just spoken, and then at the king, her voice clear and calm, carrying in the sudden quiet. The strength of a pack, as I am learning, she said, lies not in keeping its young in sterile isolation, but in acclimating them to the heartbeat of its people. How else will the future Alpha know the voices of those she will one day lead? How else will she learn to distinguish the ring of truth from the hollow chime of flattery? She gently adjusted Finn's blanket, then let her hand rest possessively on Lyra's back where Kieran held her. Fragility is not in youth, my lady. It is in a spirit never tested. The royal heir is tested every day, and she thrives. A profound silence fell. The merchant looked stunned. Isolde's perfect composure cracked for a single, glorious second, revealing a flash of pure, venomous shock. The courtiers stared, some aghast at her audacity, others newly thoughtful. Kieran, from his throne, looked at Ilara. He did not smile, but a fierce, proud light ignited in his ice-blue eyes, an acknowledgement that vibrated through the bond of their shared vow. He had brought her into the light to see if she would burn. Instead, she had reflected it blindingly. Well said, the king's voice boomed, settling the matter and silencing any retort. The heir thrives. Let that be the end of any speculation on her health or her environment. Next petitioner. The rest of the court passed in a blur for Ilara. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving her trembling internally. When they finally returned to the private wing, Kieran dismissed Tessa and Maud with a look. He handed Lyra gently to Ilara, their fingers brushing. You manipulated Isolde's own rhetoric against her, he said, his gaze intense. You used tradition to defend our break from it. That was not taught by Theon or Tessa. No, Ilara admitted, breathing in Lyra's sweet scent to steady herself. That was taught by the women of the Ashen District. We learn to defend our cubs with whatever tools are at hand, words, wit, a well-placed elbow. A ghost of something near a smile touched Kieran's lips. Then perhaps I have been looking to the wrong tutors for my court. He lingered, as if he wanted to say more, but then the mask of the Alpha slid back into place. You have passed your first test in the light, but remember, a visible target is still a target. Isolde will not forget this humiliation. Your lessons continue tomorrow. He left her then, with the two sleeping pups. Ilara sank into a chair, exhausted but humming with a strange, new energy. She had not just survived the open court. She had, in a small way, claimed a piece of it. She had spoken for Lyra, and in doing so, had begun to truly become what she had vowed to be. The path was still shrouded in shadow, thorns, and danger. But for the first time, Ilara, the foster mother, felt not just the weight of the wolf's oath, but the first faint, forging spark of its power. The victory in the open court was a sweet, fleeting wine. Its aftertaste, as Elder Theon might have warned, was one of heightened peril. Lady Isolde's public humiliation did not wilt her ambition. It pruned it back to a sharper, more venomous point. The citadel's atmosphere, which had thrummed with overt disdain, now simmered with a quieter, more dangerous tension. Ilara had graduated from a curious nuisance to a legitimate political obstacle. Her lessons intensified, taking on a darker, more practical hue. Tessa now drilled her not just on disarming holds, but on recognizing the subtle tells of an imminent attack, the shift of weight, the flick of an eye, the too casual closing of distance in a hallway. Isolde's faction will not move openly against you while the king's favor is so glaring, Tessa said. Her voice low as they sparred in the early morning light of the training yard, a secluded space normally reserved for the Luna's shield. But accidents happen, a fall down a stair, a tragic reaction to an unknown herb, a moment of distraction near a high balcony. Ilara parried a practice strike, her arm vibrating with the impact. So I should suspect every stair, every cup, every railing. Yes, Tessa replied bluntly, sweeping her leg. Ilara stumbled but stayed upright, a hard-won improvement. Until you know its history and its handler, you should. Paranoia is the foster mother's best friend. The lessons with Elder Theon also shifted. They moved from broad history to the intricate, venomous biographies of the current court's key players. He detailed Isolde's alliances, her cousin Lord Borin, who commanded the Western garrison, the master of the royal kennels, who owed his position to her patronage and controlled the palace's beloved, but sharp-eyed hounds, several senior ladies-in-waiting who were fonts of gossip and conduits of poison, both literal and figurative. You have made her look foolish, Theon wheezed, tracing a network of names on a scrap of parchment. To a wolf like Isolde, that is a wound that must be licked clean or cauterized with the pain of another. She will seek to isolate you, to undermine your credibility, or to create a scenario where the king's protection of you seems like a fatal weakness. It was Maud who provided the most tangible proof of the shifting threat. One afternoon, as Ilara nursed Lyra in the sun-drenched nursery, the old healer entered, her usual calm replaced by a grim alertness. In her hand, she held a small, linen-wrapped bundle. She unwrapped it on the table, revealing a few sprigs of a dried, purple-tinged herb with small, bell-shaped flowers. Wolfsbane, Maud said, her voice hushed. Found tucked into the seam of the new wool blankets delivered for the princess's bassinet. Not enough to kill through skin contact for a grown wolf, but for a pup with a still delicate constitution, a rash, convulsions, a weakening of the heart over time. Easily dismissed as a failure to thrive, a lingering fragility. Ilara's blood turned to ice. The peaceful act of nursing curdled into something terrifying. She pulled Lyra closer, as if the very air in the room had become toxic. The blankets, where did they come from? The royal weaver, an old wolf loyal to the crown, but his apprentice is newly taken, and his loyalty is to the silver coin Isolde's faction provides. Maud carefully rewrapped the deadly plant. I have replaced the blankets from a secure stock. The weaver's apprentice has been reassigned to the border outposts by Beta Gareth on my report, but this is just the first whisper, girl. They are testing the Citadel's defenses, testing you. That night, when Kieran made his usual silent visit, Ilara was waiting for him, the wrapped wolfsbane on the table between them. The firelight danced over his face as he examined it, his expression hardening into something so cold it seemed to suck the warmth from the room. Where, the single word was a growl. Ilara told him, her voice trembling not with fear for herself, but with a molten rage for Lyra. She was swaddled in it for her morning nap before Maud made her rounds. Kieran's hand closed into a fist around the linen bundle. When he opened it, the dried herbs were crushed to dust. Isolde is too clever to be directly linked. The apprentice will swear he found it among the mountain herbs, a tragic mistake. It was no mistake, Ilara hissed, the mother lion in her rising, sharp and defiant before the Alpha King. It was an opening move. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes that mirrored the icy fury in his own. "And how would you answer it?" he asked, a challenge in his tone, "as the foster mother with the pup's safety in your charge." She was silent for a moment, thinking not of courtly strategies from Theon, but of the harsh lessons of the Ashen district. When a rival family poisoned your well, you didn't just find a new source. You made sure they thirsted. "We don't hide the attempt," she said slowly, the plan forming as she spoke. "We announce it, publicly. We let the weaver, weeping with shame and fear for his own life, confess the terrible error of his apprentice before the court. You show mercy, dismissing the apprentice instead of executing him, praising the weaver's long service. You appear just, merciful and fiercely protective. Then," she leaned forward, "you change the protocols. All materials for the royal heir, from swaddling clothes to spoons, must now pass through a new council, one overseen by the royal foster mother and the king's healer. You use their attack to formalize my authority over Lyra's daily life. You make their poison the mortar for my fortress." Kieran stared at her, the fury in his eyes transforming into something else, shock, re-evaluation, a dawning, profound respect. In that moment, she was not just the nurturer, but a strategist, a queen in a linen robe. "You would place yourself at the center of the storm," he said. "I am already at its center," Ilara replied, gesturing to the dust of wolfsbane on the table. "This way, I have a say in the weather." A slow, grim smile touched Kieran's lips, the first true smile she had ever seen from him. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing. So be it. The next open court session was charged with a different energy. Before petitions began, Kieran rose. His presence was a crushing weight of barely leashed violence. He held up the linen bundle, now empty, but its meaning clear. "A poison was found in the bedding of the crown princess." His voice boomed, silencing the hall with its lethal calm. "Wolfsbane." A collective, sharp intake of breath. Isolde, standing serene in the front, did not flinch, but her knuckles whitened on the fan she held. Kieran narrated the discovery by the loyal weaver, the confession of the misguided apprentice. He spoke of his rage, his right to tear limb from limb. Then he spoke of mercy, of the weight of the crown, of the need for vigilance over vengeance. He commuted the apprentice's death sentence to permanent exile. He praised the weaver's devotion. The court hung on his every word, swayed by the performance of majestic control. Then he dropped the second edict, his voice leaving no room for debate. "From this hour, the safety and sustenance of the heir shall be governed by the Council of the Heir's well-being. It shall be chaired by the royal foster mother, Ilara, advised by the royal healer, Maud, and its decrees shall carry the weight of my own. All who serve the royal nursery, all who provide its goods, answer to this council." He turned his gaze directly to Isolde. "To ensure there is no confusion, no tragic miscommunication, this council's authority is absolute within its domain. Interference will be considered treason." The silence was absolute. Ilara, standing in her now customary place, felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. This was not the reluctant acceptance of the foster mother. This was the imposition of a new power structure. Isolde had overplayed her hand, and Kieran had used it to crown Ilara with real, tangible authority. In the days that followed, the citadel adjusted to this new reality. Servants now bowed lower to Ilara, their fear tinged with a new respect. Petitions for nursery positions or supply contracts came to her small, newly appointed office, a room adjacent to the nursery. Maud sat with her, teaching her to inspect ledgers, to judge character from a servant's posture and scent, to understand the complex web of vendors and loyalties. It was exhausting, head-spinning work, but with it came a strange empowerment. She was no longer just a passive recipient of protection. She was a commander of a small, vital domain. One evening, deep in the ledgers, a different kind of visitor arrived. It was not Kieran, but a young page, nervous and smelling of the stables. He handed her a small, rough-spun pouch. "For the foster mother," he stammered, "from the Delta Quarter." Inside was not a threat, but a gift, a handful of smooth river stones warm to the touch and a tiny, clumsily carved wooden wolf. A note written in a shaky hand read, "For the princess and her brother, thank you for your strength, the mothers of the Delta." Word of the wolfsbane incident and her defiant, protective response had filtered down, not just as court gossip, but as a story. A story of a human woman who had stood against hidden poison for a wolf-kind princess. To the common people, the intricate politics meant little, but a mother defending a child, that was a universal language. The gift, simple and heartfelt, moved Ilara more than any jewel or title ever could. She showed it to Kieran that night, the stones and the little wolf on her desk. He picked up the carving, his large fingers making it seem even smaller. "You have a faction of your own now," he observed, his tone unreadable. "Not of nobles, but of the people. That is a power Isolde cannot buy or intimidate." "It's not a faction," Ilara said, placing the stones in a small bowl on the windowsill where they caught the light. "It's just kindness." "In a kingdom, kindness from the many is a faction," he said. He hesitated, then added, "You are changing things, Ilara. The air in this citadel, it is unsettling." "For the better?" she dared to ask. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at the two sleeping pups, then back at her, his gaze lingering on her face, on the new lines of thought and worry, but also the new light of purpose in her eyes. "The pup thrives. That is the only metric that matters." But as the days turned into weeks, a new metric began to assert itself, one far more dangerous and intoxicating than politics. It was in the way Kieran began to linger during his nightly visits, not just watching Lyra, but asking Ilara about her day, her thoughts on a petitioner, her opinion on a new tutor for the Royal Guard's children. It was in the way their hands would occasionally brush when passing a sleeping child, the contact sending a jolt that had nothing to do with fear. It was in the deep, quiet timbre his voice took when he spoke to her alone, a tone he used with no one else. The threat of wolfsbane had been a clear external enemy. This new, creeping tension between them was an internal wilderness, uncharted and perilous. She was his daughter's foster mother, bound by a sacred vow. He was a grieving king, her protector, and her absolute sovereign. The lines were not just blurred, they were trembling. One night, after a particularly long day settling a dispute between the candlemaker and the linen washer, Ilara fell asleep in the chair by the nursery fire. She woke to find a fur throw draped over her, one that carried the unmistakable scent of pine and cold stone, Kieran's scent. He was gone, but the evidence of his quiet care was wrapped around her like an embrace. Sitting in the dark, the scent of him all around her, the memory of his grim smile after the wolfsbane plot, Ilara felt a terrifying, thrilling realization. The citadel's shadows were no longer the only thing she had to fear. The most dangerous threat to her hard-won equilibrium, to her vow, to the fragile new life she was building, might be the slowly thawing heart of the Alpha King himself, and worse still, the treacherous, answering thaw in her own. The Delta Quarter's gift of river stones became a touchstone for Ilara. They sat in their simple bowl on her windowsill, a humble counterpoint to the citadel's oppressive grandeur. They reminded her that her influence and her danger now rippled far beyond the palace walls. The Council of the Heir's well-being was more than a bureaucratic shield. It was a subtle, quiet revolution. Ilara, guided by Maud's wisdom and her own innate pragmatism, began to make changes. She audited suppliers, shifting contracts from Isolde's favored merchants to smaller, honest tradesmen from the outer districts. She mandated that a portion of the nursery's lavish budget be redirected to the Citadel's orphanage and the struggling midwives' guild. Each decision was a tiny pebble dropped into the stagnant pond of Lycania's court, sending out ripples that unsettled the established order. Lady Isolde's hostility cooled from a boiling rage to a simmering, glacial contempt. She no longer engaged in public barbs. Instead, she perfected the art of the slight omission, failing to curtsy when Ilara entered a room, forgetting to include her in the guest list for a seasonal tea, a snub Ilara secretly relished, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent the moment Ilara drew near. It was a war of presence, of erasure, and Ilara, to her own surprise, found she was well armed. Her power did not derive from Isolde's world of fans and poisoned gossip. It was rooted in the nursery, in the trust of the king, and in the growing, quiet allegiance of the common folk who heard whispers of a just foster mother. It was this new reality that set the stage for the royal hunt. The autumn hunt was a sacred tradition, a celebration of the pack's prowess and a symbolic culling of the great stag herds in the king's wood. The entire court moved to the sprawling, ancient hunting lodge for a week. Participation was not just expected of the nobility, it was a requirement for the royal family. "You will attend," Kieran informed her one evening, his tone brooking no argument. He was reviewing a map of the hunting grounds in her small office, his presence making the room feel miniature. "Lyra and Finn as well. The heir must be introduced to the rhythms of the pack, and she is strong enough to travel. The lodge has a secure wing." Ilara's stomach clenched. The citadel, with its known corridors and controlled routines, was one thing. The open woods, the chaotic excitement of the hunt, the close quarters of the lodge with a resentful nobility, it was a field of vulnerabilities. "Is it safe?" Kieran's eyes met hers, glinting in the lamplight. "Nowhere is completely safe, but at the hunt, the court is on display. Overt violence is almost unthinkable. It would violate the sanctity of the tradition. The dangers there are of a different kind." He paused, rolling up the map. "You will ride with the royal party. Tessa and a full contingent of the Luna's Shield will be your shadow." The journey to the hunting lodge was a spectacle in itself. Ilara, who had never ridden a horse, was given a gentle, broad-backed mare and placed in a covered litter adjacent to the king's own mount, where she could tend to the infants. The procession snaked through the capital and into the vibrant, fiery embrace of the autumn forest. The air was crisp with the scent of decay and wood smoke, a wild, freeing aroma after the stone and incense confines of the citadel. The lodge was a magnificent structure of timber and stone, more a fortified great hall than a delicate retreat. That first evening, a feast of epic proportions was laid in the vast firelit hall. Ilara was seated, once again, near the high table. The atmosphere was different here, more primal, less constrained by courtly etiquette. Mead flowed freely, laughter was louder, and the admiring, appraising glances of the unattached she-wolves towards their alpha king were far less discreet. Kieran presided over it all with a looser, more relaxed authority. He was in his element here, among the warriors and the hunt, the ghost of his grief seeming to recede in the face of ancient, simple traditions. Ilara watched him from beneath her lashes, a strange, sharp ache in her chest. Here was the man beneath the crown, the warrior, the provider, the primal heart of the pack. It was terrifyingly attractive. As the feast wore on, a group of young nobles began a traditional challenge game, the stone grip. A heavy, smooth river stone, much like her delta stones, but larger, was passed around. Each contestant had to grip it in one hand, holding it aloft, while a chanted count measured their strength and endurance. It was a show of raw power, a display for potential mates. Lord Borin, Isolde's cousin, a brawny wolf with a cruel smile, won several rounds, his eyes deliberately seeking Ilara as he strained, a blatant show of dominance. The court cheered. Then, with a dismissive flick of his wrist, he tossed the stone onto the high table, where it landed with a thud near Kieran's plate. "A pity we cannot see the strength of the citadel's new pillars," Borin called out, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. "Does the foster mother's arm rock cradles only, or does it have the strength to uphold the traditions of the pack?" A tense, expectant hush fell. It was a brilliant, vicious trap. To ignore it was to show weakness, to admit that her strength was only domestic, political. To attempt it and fail would be a public humiliation, proving her an outsider in this most physical of pack rituals. Ilara felt her face grow hot. She saw Isolde's faint, satisfied smile from across the hall. She saw Tessa, standing guard behind her, tense like a coiled spring. But before she could even form a response, Kieran moved. He did not look at Borin, he looked at the stone. Then, with a casualness that was more insulting than any rage, he picked it up in his right hand. His forearm corded with muscle, but his expression remained impassive, almost bored. The chant began again, but this time for the king. He held it 10 counts, 20, 50. The stone might have been a pebble. At 100, with the hall utterly silent, He stopped the chant with a slight raise of his chin. He held Ilara's gaze across the smoky space, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. "The strength of the citadel," Kieran said. His voice a low rumble that carried to every corner, "is not in any one arm. It is in the unity of the pack. It is in the heart that guards the future." He turned his gaze to Borin, and the full, chilling weight of his alpha power pressed down on the hall. "And it is in knowing which traditions uphold us, and which are mere distractions for those with nothing better to offer." He dropped the stone. It hit the wooden table with a crack that sounded like a breaking bone. The message was clear. Her defender needed no defense. He was her strength, and his was absolute. The feast resumed, but the air was changed. The challenge had been met and obliterated. Ilara was both exultant and deeply unsettled. His protection was a fortress, but it was also a cage that highlighted her perceived frailty. The next morning was the main hunt. Ilara, with the Barbies and their guards, remained at the lodge in the secured family wing. From the high balcony, she watched the hunting party surge into the forest, a thunder of hooves, a flash of fur as some shifted into their wolf forms, Kieran at the forefront, a magnificent, powerful figure astride a midnight black stallion. Her heart thumped oddly as he disappeared into the trees. The day passed quietly, too quietly. In the late afternoon, as a grey drizzle began to fall, a frantic horn blast echoed from the woods, not the triumphant call of a kill, but the urgent, repeating signal for a lost party member. Panic seized the lodge. Ilara's first, irrational fear was for Kieran, but word soon filtered in. It was Lord Borin. Separated from the main party during the chase, his horse had returned without him. A search party was organized immediately. Kieran, returning with the main group, his face grimed with sweat and forest loam, took command. As he stood in the courtyard issuing orders, his eyes found Ilara on the balcony. He gave a short, sharp nod, a command to stay, a reassurance of his return, before turning his stallion and plunging back into the dripping woods. Darkness fell, thick and premature under the storm clouds. Torches flickered in the courtyard as the search continued. Ilara paced the nursery, anxiety a live wire in her veins. Finn and Lyra, sensing her tension, were fussy. She was singing a lullaby, her voice trembling, when the door to the wing burst open. It was not Kieran, but a mud-spattered young hunter from Borin's own retinue. He staggered in, ignoring Tessa's leveled blade, his eyes wild with genuine terror. "The king," he gasped. "A rockslide in Hunter's Gorge, the path gave way as they were searching. His Majesty is trapped. They're digging, but the rain is making it worse. He's hurt, I saw blood." The world tilted. The impregnable fortress, the unwavering strength, trapped, hurt. The news raced through the lodge like wildfire, carrying with it an undercurrent of chaos. In the great hall, voices rose in alarm and, Ilara sensed, in opportunistic calculation. Beta Gareth was with the search party. The highest-ranking noble present was Lady Isolde. Ilara acted without thought. She thrust Finn into Maud's arms, bundled Lyra tightly against her own chest with a secure sling, and strode from the nursery, Tessa at her heel. "Where are you going?" Tessa demanded. "To the great hall." "Mistress, you cannot." "The king is incapacitated. The heir is here. The pack is looking for leadership," Ilara said, her voice like iron. She was not the girl from the Ashen district anymore. She was the royal foster mother, and the den was under threat. They will find it. She entered the chaotic great hall. Isolde was already at the head of the room, issuing calm, collected orders about sending more torches, boiling water for the wounded, her voice a bastion of sensible control. She was the picture of noble, capable leadership in a crisis. The court flocked to her. Isolde saw Ilara and paused, a cool, assessing gleam in her eye. "Mistress Ilara, you should be with the children. This is no place for nurturers. The woods are dangerous, and the hall needs clear heads." Ilara walked forward, through the parted crowd, until she stood before the great hearth, facing the room. She could feel Lyra's warm weight against her heart, a tiny anchor of defiance. "Isolde is right," Ilara said, her voice not loud but clear, cutting through the babble. "The woods are dangerous, and the king, our alpha, is in peril there, searching for one of our own." She let that hang, reminding them who was risking what. "Here in this lodge we are not helpless. We are the heart of the pack, and our heart must not falter. The healer Maud is organizing the infirmary here. All those with healing knowledge report to her. The master of the lodge, bring your maps of the gorge to me. We will identify every possible access point for the rescuers. The stable master, ready the draft horses and sledges for moving stone and carrying the wounded. Now. She did not shout. She did not command like Kieran. She organized like a mother preparing for a siege, with practicality and unshakable calm. She spoke to the tasks, not the titles. And because her orders were not about power, but about purpose, saving the Alpha, aiding the pack, the court, still stunned and fearful, responded. They turned from Isolde's poised figure to the woman with the air at her breast, who was telling them how to help. For a long, breathless hour, Ilara became the nexus of the rescue. She consulted maps, dispatched runners, coordinated with Maud. Isolde watched, her initial confidence hardening into icy, impotent fury. She had tried to assume the mantle of a regent. Ilara had simply taken up the reins of a household in crisis, and the pack, in its fear, had followed. Then a shout from the courtyard, "They're back!" Ilara abandoned the maps and ran, Tessa keeping pace. The courtyard was a muddied hellscape of torches and exhausted men. And there, being helped from his horse, was Kieran. One arm was bound tightly against his chest with a torn cloak. His tunic was slashed and bloody at the shoulder, and he limped heavily. But he was alive, his eyes scanning the crowd with a predator's alertness until they found her. He saw her, saw Lyra safe in her sling, saw the organized bustle of the lodge behind her. His gaze swept past Isolde, standing rigid on the steps, to the courtiers following Ilara's earlier commands. Understanding dawned in his pain-clouded eyes. He shook off the helping hands and walked toward her, each step a study in pained will. The crowd fell silent. He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell the blood, the rain, and the wild forest on him. "Report," he growled, the word meant for her alone, yet heard by all. Ilara met his gaze, her own fear melting into a fierce, protective pride. "Lord Borin is found, with a broken leg but alive. He's in the infirmary. The lodge is secured. The wounded are being seen to. We were preparing sledges for the gorge." Kieran stared at her for a long, eternal moment. In his eyes, she saw the exhaustion of pain, the shadow of death narrowly avoided, and something else, a blazing, undeniable revelation. It was the look a lost warrior gives when he finally sights his own fires burning bright on the hilltop, getting him home. He did not thank her. He did not praise her. He simply reached out his good hand, the one that had crushed the stone, and cupped the back of Lyra's head where she lay against Ilara's chest, his fingers brushing Ilara's collarbone in a touch that was both possessive and profoundly tender. Then, his voice hoarse, but carrying the full weight of his authority, he declared to the assembled pack, "The heart of the pack stands firm." He was not talking about the lodge. Every soul present knew it. He was talking about her. As he allowed himself to be led away to have his wounds treated, Ilara stood in the drizzling rain, Lyra's heartbeat sinking with her own frantic pulse. The hunt had ended not with a stag's death, but with the slaying of an illusion. She was not just the foster mother in the shadows, the political tool, the fragile human. In the crisis, she had become the pack's steady heart. And in Kieran's eyes, she had seen the terrifying, glorious truth. The Alpha King had not just found a protector for his pup. He had found his equal. Kieran's wound was deep, a gash from a shattered falling rock that had missed major arteries by a whisper, but it was his pride that festered more. The invincible Alpha, brought low by a rockslide while searching for a fool. The days that followed in the hunting lodge were a study in simmering tension. The court, having witnessed Ilara's unexpected mettle, now regarded her with a new, complicated silence. It was no longer simple disdain or curiosity. It was the wary respect accorded to a natural force. A sudden, calm mountain spring that had, when the earth shook, proven to be the deepest well. Lord Borin, his leg splintered, was a living emblem of the folly that had nearly cost the king his life. Isolde's faction was temporarily crippled, her credibility damaged by her cousin's recklessness and her own failure to command the moment of crisis. Yet, the victory felt precarious, built on shifting shale. Ilara knew the nature of predators. A wounded wolf was often more dangerous. Kieran, confined to the lodge's master chambers, was a storm contained. Ilara brought Lyra to him daily, and he would take his daughter with his good arm, his face softening only for her. But the moment Lyra was gone, the tempest returned, snapping at his attendants, brooding over maps, his frustration a palpable heat. The only person the storm seemed to calm for was Ilara. He would watch her move about the room, settling Lyra, speaking softly to Finn in his basket, with a focus that was unnervingly absolute. "They look to you now," he said abruptly one afternoon, his voice rough from disuse and pain. He was propped up in a great chair by the fire, his injured arm in a sling. Ilara paused in folding a blanket. "They look to you, sire. They are just waiting for you to rise." "They looked to you when I fell," he countered, his ice-blue eyes pinning her. "And the pack did not scatter, it held, you held it." He said it not as praise, but as a scientist stating a proven fact. "Isolde offered them order, you offered them purpose. The pack will always choose purpose." He shifted, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "When we return to the Citadel, the balance will have shifted. The challenge will not be open defiance. It will be 1,000 small cuts, petitions to undermine your counsel, whispers questioning your influence over me, over the air. They will try to make you seem ambitious, a grasping human using a pup as a stepping stone." Ilara met his gaze, the familiar fire kindling in her chest. "And what do you believe, my king?" He was silent for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. "I believe," he said slowly, each word weighted, "that I dragged a woman from the ashes to save a spark. And in doing so, I have brought a wildfire into my hall. I do not know if it will warm my kingdom or burn it to the ground, but I find I cannot look away from the light." The honesty in his words stole her breath. It was an admission of vulnerability, of uncertainty, from a man who embodied certainty. It was more intimate than any touch. The return to the Citadel was a somber procession. Kieran rode in a litter, his public vulnerability a shocking sight that further cemented the gravity of the hunt's events. Ilara rode beside it, Lyra in her arms, Finn with Maud. The people of the city lined the streets, not just cheering for their wounded king, but bowing their heads to her. They saw the foster mother who had saved the princess, who had steadied the pack. Flowers, simple wildflowers, were thrown in her path. Inside the Citadel, the atmosphere was indeed different. The bows were deeper, the Mistress Ilara spoken with more genuine respect. But Kieran had been right. The opposition had gone subterranean. Within a week, Ilara's newly established council found its decisions delayed by bureaucratic reviews. A sympathetic elder suggested, in an open meeting, that perhaps the heir, now growing stronger, might benefit from the refined upbringing a noble she-wolf of the court could provide, in addition to the foster mother's physical care. The word wet nurse was never said, but it hung in the air. Ilara fought back with quiet, relentless efficiency. She used the authority Kieran had given her, citing the king's own decrees. She had Maud compile records of Lyra's improved health under her care. She made sure the children were visibly, joyfully present in the royal gardens, a picture of robust health that defied any whisper of inadequate nurture. But the most potent attack came from an unexpected quarter. A delegation from a neighboring, traditionalist pack arrived on a diplomatic visit. Their alpha, a grizzled old wolf named Garin, was a known critic of Kieran's modern ways. At a state dinner, after glaring at Ilara's presence at the high table all evening, he finally voiced his disgust. "A human at the alpha's table, nursing a royal heir," he boomed, his voice silencing the musicians. "It is against the natural order, Kieran. Your mate's spirit must howl in shame. The pup needs wolf blood to strengthen her, not the meek milk of a prey species." The insult was so crude, so blatantly offensive, that the entire hall froze. Kieran, still moving stiffly from his injury, went perfectly still. Ilara felt the wave of his rage before she saw it, a pressure that made the candles gutter. She knew if he erupted, it would be a diplomatic disaster, playing into Garen's narrative of a king ruled by irrational attachment. She placed a hand on the table, not looking at Kieran, but straight at old Alpha Garen. Before Kieran could speak, she did. "The natural order, Alpha Garen," she said, her voice calm and carrying, "is that a cub thrives. It does not count the legs of the one who feeds it, nor the origin of the milk, so long as it is given with love and strength. She stood, gently handing Lyra to a startled Tessa beside her. You speak of strength, of wolf blood. She walked around the table, stopping where the firelight illuminated her. She pushed back the sleeve of her gown, revealing the faint, silvery scar from the moonthorn ceremony and the stronger, newer muscles in her forearm earned from Tessa's training. This blood sealed a vow to the moon goddess herself. This arm rocks cradles, yes. It also held a kingdom steady when its alpha fell. It defends what is mine, what is his. She gestured to Kieran, her eyes never leaving Garen's. If the strength of the pack is only in the blood, then you are weaker than the poorest wolf here, for you have none of the loyalty, the courage, or the mother heart that truly sustains a pack. You have only an empty vein and a full mouth. The silence was deafening, Garen's face purpled with rage and shock. No one, least of all a human woman, spoke to an alpha that way. Kieran rose then, not with violence, but with a slow, deliberate power that commanded every eye. He walked to Ilara's side, his presence a solid wall of support. He looked at Garen, and his smile was a razor's edge. My foster mother speaks for this pack, Kieran declared, his voice freezing the very air. Her heart is its heart, her strength is its strength. Any who insult her, insult Lycania. Our diplomacy is concluded, Garen. You will leave at dawn. It was a staggering rebuke. The neighboring pack was ejected, a diplomatic rift opened, all for her defense. In the thunderstruck silence that followed their exit, Ilara finally trembled, the adrenaline draining away. Kieran's good hand found the small of her back, a steadying, possessive point of contact. That night he came to her chambers not as a silent visitor, but as a petitioner. He dismissed Maud and Tessa with a look. The children slept. What you did tonight, he began, standing before her, his intensity a tangible force. I may have started a war, she finished, her voice weary. You ended a pretense, he corrected. He stepped closer. You did not hide behind my title, you did not wait for my defense. You stood, as an alpha's mate would stand, and defended our pack's honor, our den. The word mate hung between them, no longer a hidden implication, but a spoken reality. Kieran, she whispered, the first time she had ever dared his name. It broke the last dam. He closed the distance between them, his good hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. I brought you here for milk, he murmured, his gaze searching hers, raw and unguarded. But you have given my daughter life. You have given my pack a heart, and you have given me, he shook his head, as if the words were too immense. You have given me back the sun. I have fought the urge since the moment you sang my pup to sleep. I am done fighting. His lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a confession, a release of months of coiled tension and unspoken need. It was the taste of wildfire and sanctuary. Ilara melted into it, her hands gripping the fabric of his tunic, all resistance, all fear, incinerated in the heat of his truth. When they parted, foreheads resting together, the world had realigned. The court will call it a political move, he breathed, a way to legitimize your position permanently. Is it? She asked, her heart hammering. It is the only move my heart recognizes, he said. You are already her mother. Be my queen, rule with me, not from the shadows, but at my side. Let me build a world worthy of the woman who rebuilt mine. It was not a question. It was a plea from a king who had finally found his equal. The coronation of Queen Ilara, 3 months later, was unlike any in Lycania's history. It was held not in the dead of winter, but at the cusp of spring. She did not wear the traditional heavy silver crown of the Lycanian queens. Instead, the royal smith, under Kieran's direction, had forged a new diadem. It was a delicate, intertwining band of silver and iron, wolf metal and human steel. Set within it were not cold jewels, but 3 polished river stones from the delta, flanking a single brilliant moonstone. Before the assembled pack and the representatives of neighboring realms, Ilara stood clad in a gown of deep gray, the color of her ashen district cloak and the wolf's pelt. At her side stood Kieran, his strength fully returned, his pride a radiant mantle. In her arms she held Lyra, now a plump, bright-eyed pup with a dusting of silver fur. Beside them, Maud held Finn, a healthy, laughing boy. The High Elder placed the new crown upon Ilara's head. We crown you, Ilara, Mother Queen of Lycania. By milk and by might, by vow and by valor, you are the heart of this pack. Protect it, nurture it, and lead it with the fierceness of a wolf and the compassion of a woman. As the cheers erupted, Kieran turned to her. He did not kiss her before the crowd. Instead, he took Lyra from her arms, and then, with a reverence that brought a hush, he knelt before his queen. He pressed his forehead to the bundled form of his daughter, then lifted his eyes to Ilara. "My queen," he said, "the words a sacred vow. My heart." Ilara looked out over the sea of faces, the awed, the accepting, the still resistant. She saw Isolde, standing defeated but watching with a new, grudging understanding. She saw the mothers from the Delta, weeping joyful tears in the crowd. She saw Tessa and Maud, beaming with pride. She felt the weight of the crown, not as a burden, but as a testament. She had entered the citadel for a bag of gold and a chance. She had entered a story of grief and power, and she had rewritten its ending. She was no longer the foster mother from the Ashen district. She was the mother queen who had breastfed a dying pup and in doing so had nourished a kingdom back to life. Leaning down, she touched Kieran's face, then lifted him to stand beside her. She took Lyra back into her arms, her daughter, her first gift to this new world. Together, the king, the queen, the heir, and the little human boy who was now a prince of wolves faced their pack. The Alpha King had asked for milk for his pup, and in the depths of a mother's heart, he had found the kingdom he never knew he needed. The end. If you love this, like and subscribe to this channel.